The sky to the south was wrong. Abraham had been awake before the sun. He always was. The man who had left everything God asked him to leave had learned to live lightly, to sleep the way a shepherd sleeps, with one ear always open. But this morning the horizon was not pink with dawn. It was black. A column of smoke rose from the direction of the Jordan Valley, thick and dark, spreading across the pale sky like the shadow of something that could no longer be looked at directly. He had been there the night before, not in Sodom. He had been standing in the road outside his own camp, arguing with God. We will get to that argument, because it is one of the most extraordinary things any human being has ever said to the Almighty, and almost nobody talks about it. But first, the smoke. This is not a story about fire. This is not a story about sinners getting what they deserved. This is not a sermon designed to make you feel safer than the people who died. This is the story of the last night a great city ever had, and 4 people who almost didn't escape it. One of them was a man who knew better and stayed too long. One of them was a man who made a wager with God the night before and lost sleep over it. 2 of them were young women who walked out of a burning city without their fiancés, and the text does not pause once to acknowledge what that felt like. And one of them had a name that history never recorded. We will come back to her, because she matters more than you might think. The city of Sodom had stood in the Jordan Valley for generations. In the time of Abraham and Lot, the valley of the Jordan was described in Genesis as looking like the garden of the Lord, well-watered, fertile, green in a region where green meant wealth. Lot had seen it first from a high place. His uncle Abraham had given him the choice. You pick your direction, I'll take what's left. And Lot looked at the valley. He saw the green, he saw the water. He saw what he thought was opportunity. He pitched his tent toward Sodom. 4 words. And from those 4 words, everything that follows is set in motion. Here's what you need to understand about Lot. He was not a bad man. The Apostle Peter, writing centuries later, calls him righteous Lot, a man who was tormented in his soul day after day by the things he saw and heard in Sodom. He knew, he watched, he stayed. That tension, knowing something is wrong and staying anyway, because the address is good and the schools are fine, and you've already built something here, is not ancient history. You know that tension. Most people do. But by the time our story begins, Lot is no longer camping on the outskirts. He is sitting at the city gate. In the ancient world, you didn't sit at the city gate unless you had standing there. Lot had become part of the city, a city elder perhaps, a man of property. A man with daughters engaged to local men. He had moved in. The question Genesis asks without ever asking it directly is, what had Sodom become by this point, and how long had it been becoming it? God gives us one answer in the book of Ezekiel, and it may surprise you. When God lists the sins of Sodom through the prophet Ezekiel, he says, she had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but she did not aid the poor and needy. Violence and exploitation of the vulnerable, the outcry, the Hebrew word is tsa'aqah, had been rising for a long time. Pay attention to that word, tsa'aqah. It is the same word used in Exodus for the cry of the Hebrew slaves under Pharaoh. It is not the sound of people sinning. It is the sound of people being hurt. When God says the outcry of Sodom has come up to him, he is saying, someone down there is suffering. Someone is being crushed, and the sound of it has reached the throne. God says in Genesis chapter 18, I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. He does not say he already knows. He says he is going to see. He sends 2 angels, who appear as men, to go down and investigate. And while those 2 are on their way to Sodom, the Lord himself lingers with Abraham. What follows is one of the most audacious prayers in all of Scripture. Abraham, this man who came from nothing, who was called out of the city of Ur, who has been walking with God for decades, stands before the Lord and says, what if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you destroy it? Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Abraham is not asking about justice. He is arguing for mercy. And God says yes, 50 and the city is spared. Abraham pushes. What about 45? Yes. 40? Yes. Yes. 20? Yes. And then he says, and you can hear the nervousness in the text, do not be angry, Lord, but what about 10? What if there are just 10 good people in that city? And God says yes. Even for 10 I will not destroy it. Abraham goes home. The two angels walk down the road toward Sodom. And the city of Sodom does not know what is coming. Stay with me. Because what happens next inside those walls is not what most people expect. Before we go inside those walls, take one moment. We have followed Lot from a high place, looking down at a valley that looked like paradise. We have heard the word that means the sound of suffering reaching God. We have watched Abraham argue down from 50 to 10, hoping, desperately hoping, that somewhere in Sodom there are 10 people worth saving. If this is landing for you, if you have ever thought about the line between patience and judgment, or what it means to linger in a place you know is wrong, subscribe to this channel. There is more of this coming. Tap the bell, and keep watching. 'Cause we are about to go inside the city on its last night, and nothing in Sodom is what the people there expected it would be. Two men, they appear as men, reach the gate of Sodom in the evening. The city is winding down. The market stalls are closing. Men are returning from the fields. Children are being called in from the streets. Lot is sitting at the city gate. He sees the two strangers, and something in him moves immediately. He gets up. He bows. He says, "Please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet." The two strangers say no. "We will spend the night in the town square." And Lot presses them. He urges them strongly. He will not take no for an answer. Why does Lot react this way? Why does he see two strangers and feel an urgency, almost a panic, about getting them inside? Was it simple hospitality? Or had Lot, after years in this city, learned that strangers did not survive the night in Sodom's streets? The text doesn't say, but his hands are already on their arms, already steering them toward his house. Even as they try to wave him off, they come in, he bakes them bread, they eat. And then, before they lie down, the men of Sodom surround the house. Genesis chapter 19, verse 4. The men of the city, the men of Sodom, from every quarter, both young and old, all the people to the last man. This is not a mob from the rough part of town. This is the entire city. Every household, every age. And they demand that Lot bring out his guests. But it gets stranger. The two visitors, who have been sitting quietly at Lot's table eating bread, now act. They reach out, they pull Lot back inside, and they strike the crowd outside with blindness. Every man in that mob goes blind in an instant. And then Genesis records one of the most chilling details in the entire story. The men outside, struck blind, unable to see, kept groping for the door. They did not leave. Blind, they kept searching. They could not stop what they had already decided to do. A whole city that had long since passed the point where it could choose differently. The angels turned to Lot. "It is time. Gather your family. Anyone you have in this city, sons, daughters, sons-in-law, get them. Now. Because we are about to destroy this place." Lot goes to the young men who are to marry his daughters. He tells them what the angels told him. "Get up. Leave. The city is about to be destroyed." And they laughed at him. They thought he was joking. Lot, the man sitting at the gate, the man of property, the respected elder, was telling them the city was going to be wiped off the map, and they looked at his face and laughed, because they had lived their whole lives in Sodom, because nothing had ever happened to Sodom, because the city had been here longer than any of them could remember, and it would be here long after all of them were gone. They were wrong. When dawn began to break, the angels did not ease Lot gently toward the door. They said, "Hurry. Take your wife and your 2 daughters, they are the ones who are here, and go, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city." And here is the word from the Hebrew that carries more weight than almost any word in this story, vayit'mahmaH, and he lingered. Even then, with 2 divine beings standing in his house, with the sky lightening toward what would become the most terrible morning in Sodom's history, Lot lingered. He hesitated. He stood in his own doorway and paused. The angels did not argue with him. They did not make a speech. They reached out their hands. They took Lot by the hand, and they took his wife by the hand. and they took his daughters by the hand, and they brought them outside the city. Here is the part nobody tells you. The angels had to physically remove this man from his own house. Not because Lot was wicked, because leaving is hard, even when you know you have to, even when the evidence is undeniable, even when angels are holding your hand. Vayit'mahmaH, he lingered. The command when they were outside was simple: escape for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, or you will be consumed. And they ran. The sun had risen over the land. Lot and his family were running. The 2 daughters, his wife, Lot himself. 4 people moving as fast as 4 people can move across open ground, away from a city they had called home, away from everything they had built, away from the sons-in-law who had laughed. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities. The heat would have been impossible. Josephus, the 1st century Jewish historian, records standing at the Dead Sea region in his own day and describing a landscape still bearing the marks of catastrophe: scorched earth, a desolate plain where the valley of the Jordan had once been green and full of cities. He writes that the remnants of divine fire could still be seen. In the year 2021, researchers published a paper in the journal Scientific Reports, describing what they found at a site called el-Hammam in the Jordan Valley, a Bronze Age city roughly consistent with the region of Sodom. The researchers found evidence of extreme temperatures, melted building materials, pottery with glass fused to the surface, skeletal remains that bore signs of violent and sudden death. The temperatures required to produce these effects exceed 2,000 degrees Celsius. That is hotter than a volcanic eruption, hotter than most military ordnance. The researchers' leading hypothesis was a cosmic airburst, a meteor or comet exploding above the city, releasing a shockwave and thermal pulse that destroyed everything beneath it in seconds. The Bible says fire and sulfur fell from the Lord out of heaven. Science found something fell from the sky and melted a city. These 2 things are not in conflict. They are a conversation. Now watch what happens next. Lot's wife, she is running. She has crossed the edge of the city. She has her daughters with her. She has heard the command, do not look behind you, and she looks behind her. The Hebrew word beneath this moment, the root of what she does, is nabat, to look. But nabat is not a glance. Nabat means to gaze, to look with direction, with longing, with intent. She does not accidentally turn her head. She turns towards Sodom because part of her is still there, and she becomes a pillar of salt. Here is what we planted at the very beginning of this story: her name, her unnamedness in the text of Genesis. We have walked through this entire story, the bargaining, the angels, the blindness, the mob, the fire, and she is still called only his wife. Jewish tradition gives her the name Edith. Some ancient sources call her Adu, but Genesis does not tell us, and that silence is deliberate. This is not a story about a woman who was punished for curiosity. This is not a footnote in the story of Lot. This is not a cautionary tale designed to make you afraid to look over your shoulder. This is a portrait of every human being who has ever stood at the edge of a new life, hands stretched toward the future, feet already moving forward, and felt the full weight of what they are leaving behind. Her name is not recorded because her name is every name. Her face is not described because her face is every face. She looked back, not because she was evil, because the city behind her was her whole life, her house, her neighbors, her routines, the people she knew, the streets she had walked, the version of herself that had been built inside those walls. She looked back with longing, and she became a monument to what that longing costs. 2,000 years after that morning, a man named Jesus of Nazareth was speaking to his disciples about the last days. He said, "It will be just as it was in the days of Lot." People were buying, selling, planting, building. Then fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. And then he said something extraordinary. He said, "Remember Lot's wife." 3 words. After 2,000 years, he did not say remember Sodom. He did not say remember the destruction. He said, "Remember her." The unnamed woman standing at the edge of everything, looking back. Because Jesus knew that the danger is not always behind us. It is inside us. The pull toward what we have already left. The backward glance at the life we said we were done with. The lingering. Vayit'mahmaH. Abraham stood on a hill that morning and looked south. The valley was filled with smoke, thick, black, rising like the smoke of a furnace. Every city, gone. The ground where the green valley had been. The cities Lot had seen from the high place and chosen, because they looked like paradise. Smoke. He had argued with God the night before and brought the number down to 10. 10 righteous people, and the city would be spared. There had not been 10. And Abraham stood on that hill, and the smoke rose, and history moved on. 3 things to carry out of Sodom. The first is this: God's patience is real, and it is longer than you think. Before a single flame fell, there was a negotiation. There was a warning. There were angels walking into the city in person, offering Lot and his family a way out. There was Abraham in the road pleading, and God answering him, respectfully, carefully, every time. The destruction of Sodom was not a snap decision. It was the end of a long patience that had been tested and tested and tested, and at last was finished. If the tsa'aqah, outcry of the suffering, had not been rising for a long time, no angels would have come. God hears the cry of those who are being hurt, and He answers. The second thing, the person you need to watch most carefully is yourself, not the city outside, not the culture around you. Lot lingered. His own hand had to be taken, by an angel, to move him toward the door. His sons-in-law laughed, because they thought they had more time, more normal days, more ordinary mornings. They were wrong. The hardest leaving is not the one forced on you by catastrophe. It is the one you already know you need to do and keep putting off. And the third thing, the one that will stay with you long after you close this video. She is you, not a cautionary tale, not a villain, not a woman who made one bad choice and paid for it. A human being, with history, with roots, with a whole life in that valley, who stood at the exact moment of rescue and felt the weight of everything she was walking away from. She felt it so powerfully that she turned. And she is you every time you turn back toward what God has already brought you out of. She is you every time you say you are done with something, but keep the door cracked. She is you in every backward glance, every reopened chapter, every sleepless night spent in a city you already know is burning. Jesus remembered her. 2,000 years later, He said her name, the name Genesis wouldn't give her. Remember Lot's wife. So let me ask you this. What do you keep looking back at? What is the city you keep turning toward? Even as the smoke is already rising, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. There are more stories like this one. Stories older than history and more alive than this morning. Abraham walked home with the smell of smoke on the wind. The valley was gone. And God had kept His word, every single part of it, the warning, the rescue, the fire, every single part.